What's up, guys? I actually played a game and my microphone was muted the entire time. So rather than seeing the recording, of me being silent, I'm just going to go over the game now that it's over with volume because that makes more sense. So we started off at 1949. As you can see, we're 1955, so we did win. So let's go through the game against this 1850. He opened up with e4, and you know what we do against that. We play the Caro-Kann. And which variation does he go into? The exchange. So we take back, obviously. Now we have to develop our minor pieces. Knights come out first, generally. So that's what I do. He develops his knight here. Now this is a little weird to me because usually they play c3, reinforcing the center. Sometimes c4, attacking the center. But they usually don't block the pawn with their knight, which doesn't really do much. I'm not sure why it's there. So it's my turn, and I develop these two minor pieces. This light squared bishop, if they let me, I don't want to lock it in, which means I want to develop it. And since they didn't play h3, I'm going to now use this as my opportunity to develop it outside of the pawn chain because I want to play e6 so that I can develop my dark square bishop. Now he attacks my bishop. Very common standard response once you pin a knight. However, this guy's 1850 and he should see beyond. He shouldn't instantly do this because he has to understand that this knight is protecting this pawn. You can't do this. It literally loses. So I take the knight because he has to recapture. If he recaptures with his pawn, his structure is garbage, and I still take this pawn, right? And if he takes with the queen, I take this pawn again um, with tempo. Now the thing you have to calculate here as black before you take the knight, which I did, was knight takes, pawn takes, and you have to see that after you take with the knight, in certain openings like the French um, and others, there's this trick where this bishop moves out of the way with check, and then the queen picks up the knight now that it's making contact. But in this case, the knight actually covers the checking square, and the queen, because this pawn's here, doesn't have any checking squares, so you can go for this. So I did, and I win a pawn. And now any GM would win this with black from here. So white already made his mistake. It's just up to me to convert this. So he moves his queen again because he has to, because I'm hitting it. But I thought that this square kind of takes away from the bishop, kind of forcing the bishop to a different square. And these squares are kind of nice for the bishop. They're more aggressive. So I get he's hitting this, but I wasn't sure what this does really. I kind of thought that this was a better move, and it turns out that it was a better move because this pressures this pawn, which means e6 and bishop d6, always runs into queen takes pawn. But he played here, so I didn't mind it. I briefly considered knight here, hitting the queen with tempo, but that's just way too fancy. It doesn't really do anything and kind of tangles me up. So I just went back. That most, you know, natural move. Also looking at the b4 square um, in the future because it's juicy. So he castled. Most natural response was black. e6. What else, right? And this goes to show you that if his queen was here, developing this bishop would be trickier because of the pressure, right? Um, but now that he didn't do that, and he still didn't go here last move, I said, now's my time to get this bishop out of here since this pawn is perfectly fine. What was that? So in this position, I played bishop d6, developing my bishop very harmoniously in the center with tempo. And I figured now if he ever got to the g file, I just castle no problems. But instead of going to the G file, he does queen f5, trying to be cute, with the idea that I can't take the queen because it's pinned. But in my head, I said, this is cute, but it doesn't threaten anything. So my intention was to castle anyway, and now when I castle, your queen's hanging. So you have to move it again. So it's cute, but you kind of just screwed yourself. Because now I castle. This is not checkmate because of the knight, right? You don't have time to pin the knight because your queen's hanging. So that move was just bad, queen f5. Now he goes to the square. He could have gone to anyway. Um, but again, this queen's now in the way of his bishop, which is where you would create alignment threats and stuff. It's also no longer on a light square, teaming up with his bishop. His queen's kind of like a lower rated player might be scared of it, but I think this queen is completely misplaced. So I don't even know what I played here. Let me see. I was considering a bunch of stuff. I think like a6, always a nice move. Preparing stuff. Rook c8, increasing mathematical activity of my position. Um, e5 looks actually like a strong move. But then I think at the end of all of this, I noticed that I had knight b4. And knight b4 hits his bishop. The bishop has no squares on this diagonal. So if it moves, it doesn't have a threat. So if it moves, I would fork and win. So basically, I noticed this wins the bishop. Yes, it's just a trade, but I'm already up a pawn. And if I can take his light squared bishop 2 for a knight, I figured that just decreases even more of his counterplay, because often white's counterplay is based on light squares. Um, so I went for it. E5 looks strong, but it also looks way more losable for someone like me. Like I can mess that up for sure. Once my pawns are no longer protecting each other, once they're hanging pawns, I can mess that up. So I keep the structure solid and play with the pieces because why not, right? So he does this, which is ridiculous. So I was happy to see it because I was going to take anyway. And he should be developing or spending his moves to do something, not that. Now he's got this. If you were going to take back, like, do it with the queen or a rook to keep your structure intact. But now this is another weakness, and which creates even more weaknesses, like on b3. Um, so now it's time for me to increase the mathematical power of my position as far as number of squares controlled on board. And he pushes this, a little dubious, and again a waste of time. Same color as his bishop, which was weird. Not sure what he's trying to clamp down on. Maybe he was trying to stop e5, but I don't see this. I'm not even, I think it's just not a good move, right? So I played a6, standard move in lots of openings is black. I love it as a when I'm playing black. I love a6. I think it's like the best move. Oops. Um, I mean, not that this was a threat or anything, because I was actually hoping he would do this last move instead of the pawn move, because rook b8, I mean bishop b8, perfectly fine move. Preparing to kick the knight and then create a battery, right? Against a king with no king's knight. So I was hoping he would do that, but he moved the pawn. So I was like, okay, fine. What do I do here? I'm up a pawn. My pieces are well placed. Time for. He has weaknesses, which I could attack immediately, but I don't see the rush necessarily. It's long-term weakness, so I can start with a minority attack. So then I played a6, um, and he contests my bishop, and I didn't see a need to take him. And if he took me, he would develop my queen. So it looked perfectly fine to me. So I said, let me continue with my plan of minority attack. That's what I did. He takes, I obviously recapture, up a pawn, about to get in my minority attack so I can use the c file and win the game. So he contests the c file. I have a bunch of good moves here. I played a good move, but not the best. You should definitely go here and attack this, and then when he goes to defend it, you just get the free doubling. And then when it's your move again, then you push B4. I push B4 immediately, which is probably what you would do if there was a pawn here defending this, and this idea is not possible. You still could double, not double with tempo, which is obviously way better, but you could double, or you could probably just play B4. He moves his knight to the side, and I didn't even realize here that this pawn is just hanging, right? Takes, 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 and if rook over, queen somewhere, and that's that. I just saw that takes, knight in here um, would be annoying, but he would end up losing a pawn. So I should have taken it, but I didn't, because instead I saw this move. Once his knight was, it used to guard here, but then it moved to the side, releasing this square. So I said, yes, I can do anything, but this hits the queen with tempo while putting my knight on a great square. So how can this not be a great move to throw in before you do anything else, basically? Because the queen's not going to move to like an amazing square. So it can't go here and attack or whatever because of the knight. So I felt like it would just be a great move to have. So I did it. Queen moved here. Um, Now I didn't necessarily want a queen trade, but I figured that if I did, it would fix his pawn, but I would get a passer. And I am up a pawn. If I just liquidate this side and play this endgame with a connected passer, I could probably outplay him and win. There are other moves, but I took the queen. And then I took the pawn to simplify. And then I moved the rook because if I take this rook and he takes me back, now he has control of the c file, which coordinates with his knight. And if I do something else, like create Luft, let's say, and he takes, then he could jump his knight to like, I don't know, b6 and d7 and harass me a little. And none of that really was a big deal. But I also saw that rook b8, in addition to avoiding this trade, gives me a file to infiltrate down. It also stops his knight from going to any of these squares. If he goes to these squares, my knight can trade with it, which is perfectly fine for me and what I want. So I played rook b8 because it looked very aggressive, and now I'm threatening to infiltrate. And if he challenges me, well, now I can bring my other rook to the c file, and it just looks very aggressive for me. So that's what I did, as opposed to trading rooks. He kicks my knight. I move my knight into his territory, knowing I have an outpost here. Now he comes in with some threats on my pawn, and I said there's no way here I'm going to go into defensive mode. I need to attack something here. Oops. Um, so I moved my rook over because I knew that once he took, I'd be able to bring this rook that I just moved into the game on super active squares. Whereas this rook can't go here because of the knight, right? Can't go here and attack the knight because of the pawn, whereas this can. It also increases the mathematical activity of my position by any other move, the most out of any of my moves. So that's increases activity, right? So he doubles his rooks, but I thought that was bad. I think he needed to take and go for his activity, right? And liquidate and try to hold. But once he did this, this allows me to disconnect his rooks with my knight, which is what I did, leaving this guy in the no man's land. And here he had to take stuff of mine. Take a rook, take a pawn. I calculated that if he takes my rook and I take back, and he jumps his knight in, deflecting my knight so he can mate me on the back rank, that it doesn't work because this knight defends. My knight here defends backward my rook. So I saw that. Um, on this move, I honestly don't remember because I've actually played this yesterday or 2 days ago. If I was thinking here or just activity, but I calculated that I would definitely be better, whatever it was. But then he just blunders a piece and hangs his rook for some ridiculous reason and then resigns, I think. Yeah, he resigns. So that was a pretty easy, straightforward game, even though it says only 83% accuracy, which is a little weird because it seemed kind of simple and straightforward. But saying b5 is a mistake because I have takes, takes, takes. What do I have? I have. Do I have takes and then like? No. What do I have? What do I have? Oh. Oh my God. I win a piece here. You kick the queen, and because the queen is tied down to the defense of the bishop, you can't. Here it hangs, here it hangs, here it hangs. It has two moves here, which runs into this, and here, which runs into this. So you just win a piece. I totally missed it. That's actually a weird tactic. Interesting. I didn't even consider that, but that's pretty cool. So yeah, that's why b5 is a mistake. Otherwise, I was like, it seems like a pretty good move. So yeah, but winning a piece is way better. So I'll do that instead. And then knight e4 is a miss. Knight e. Oh yeah, because the pawn's just free. I could literally just take the pawn. Queen's an inaccuracy, but it's completely winning. It simplifies. It's very practical. I still like it. But a better move would be. What would a better move be? Oh, you could still just take the pawn. Because if the queen takes, the knight takes. And if he kicks the knight, you could take the queen. And if he takes the knight with the rook, you throw in the check and then take the queen. So yeah, they say this is an accuracy, but that's because they want me to move here, and no, that move doesn't make sense to me. So yeah, and that was it. So it was a pretty easy, straightforward game. The only thing I'm curious about is after he did this, instead of going queen f5 here, instead of letting my bishop out, what if he immediately goes? Hold on, when did I kick it? Yeah, here. What if he here goes queen g3, making it hard for me to develop? My plan in my head was to say, okay, I can't do this, which is like the standard development. I'll have to go g6. And so that was my plan. I like how they're saying rook c8. That's funny. Again, increases mathematical activity, but g6 makes the most sense. And after castling, bishop g7. If they like g6, then, I mean, everything's fine. I don't see any problems. I don't see any problems. Just go back, threaten it. Yeah, my position looks solid. This doesn't work. Okay, cool. All right. So, with that game, we get to 1955. Stay tuned for the next game, which will be live and unmuted, where we reach 1960 something. Let's go.